Case 1. Joseph David Emerson built a respectable career as a commercial pilot for Alaska Airlines. Trusted to carry hundreds of passengers safely across the skies, he was seen by many as a calm and reliable professional. But that image collapsed during a shocking mid-air incident that would make headlines across the world. Emerson, who was off-duty and seated in the cockpit jump seat of a flight from Everett, Washington to San Francisco, suddenly tried to shut down the plane's engines mid-flight. According to court records, Emerson reached for the engine fire handles controls that cut fuel to the engines while the aircraft was flying at about 31,000 feet. The quick-thinking pilots immediately stopped him, restrained him, and diverted the plane to Portland, Oregon, where police took him into custody. During questioning, Emerson admitted he had taken psychedelic mushrooms about 2 days earlier and had gone nearly 48 hours without sleep. He told investigators he believed he was dreaming and was trying to wake up. The incident alarmed the aviation industry. Emerson faced 83 counts of reckless endangerment and 1 count of endangering an aircraft, representing every person on board. Prosecutors said his actions could have caused a disaster. In 2025, he pleaded guilty to a federal charge of interfering with flight crew members and entered a no-contest plea in state court. In September 2025, an Oregon judge sentenced Emerson to 50 days in jail, granting credit for time already served, along with 5 years of probation and hundreds of hours of community service. Case 2. David Hans Arntzen spent more than 2 decades flying for Alaska Airlines, trusted to guide thousands of travelers safely from one city to another. Colleagues once described him as experienced and confident. But that reputation collapsed in 2014 when a random drug and alcohol test after 2 commercial flights exposed what federal prosecutors later called a serious breach of aviation safety. Evidenced by official reports, Arntzen had just completed flights from San Diego to Portland and then to Orange County when he was selected for post-flight testing. The results showed a blood alcohol concentration of 0.134 and 0.142%, nearly 4 times the legal limit for pilots under federal law. Investigators said he had been responsible for the safety of 160 passengers during those trips. When questioned by federal agents, Arntzen initially claimed he had not been drinking, but the evidence left no doubt. The U.S. Attorney's Office charged him with flying under the influence, a federal felony that carries strict penalties because of the danger it poses to the public. The case highlighted how the aviation industry depends on absolute trust that every person in the cockpit is fully sober and alert. Prosecutors emphasized that Arntzen's actions had endangered lives and violated the public's faith in professional pilots. Arntzen pleaded guilty in 2017 to operating a commercial aircraft while intoxicated. The following year, a federal judge sentenced him to 1 year and 1 day in prison, followed by supervised release. His pilot's license was revoked, ending a career that had once seemed steady and accomplished. Case 3. Russell Williams, a decorated Canadian Air Force colonel and an experienced military pilot who once stood among the country's most trusted servicemen. Born in 1963, he joined the Canadian Forces in 1987 and quickly advanced through the ranks. Over the years, he became a respected pilot, flying prime ministers, governors general, and members of the royal family aboard official government aircraft. His professionalism and composure earned him command of Canadian Forces Base Trenton, one of the largest and most vital air bases in the nation. But beneath the image of a disciplined officer and skilled aviator hid a life of escalating criminal behavior that would horrify Canada. For several years, Williams secretly broke into homes across Ontario, stealing women's clothing and undergarments. What began as fetish-driven thefts grew into violent sexual assaults, and finally, 2 brutal murders. His crimes were meticulously organized. He photographed his victims, cataloged his break-ins, and stored thousands of images documenting his hidden obsession. In early 2010, the disappearance of Jessica Lloyd, a 27-year-old woman from Belleville, triggered an intense investigation. Tire tracks found near her home matched those from Williams's Nissan Pathfinder, linking him to the crime scene. When police brought him in for questioning, the once calm colonel and pilot slowly broke under pressure. After hours of interrogation, he confessed not only to Lloyd's killing, but also to the 2009 murder of Corporal Marie-France Como, a soldier who had served under his command at CFB Trenton. In October 2010, Russell Williams pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with sexual assault and 82 break-ins. He was sentenced to 2 life terms with no chance of parole for 25 years. The military immediately stripped him of his rank, destroyed his uniform, and revoked all honors. Case 4. Anastasios Balian was a trained pilot who once enjoyed the freedom of flight that comes with holding a private pilot's license. But in 2025, that freedom came to an abrupt end when he used his aircraft not for travel or tourism, but to commit a major drug smuggling crime that would land him in prison for nearly a decade. In March 2025, Balian flew a small light aircraft from Belgium, making a stop in Calais before landing at an airfield in Essex, England. At first glance, it seemed like a routine international flight. However, officers from the UK's border force, acting on intelligence, decided to carry out a detailed inspection of his plane. What they discovered would expose the real purpose of his journey. Hidden in a concealed compartment behind the rear seats, investigators found 30 kilograms of cocaine, neatly packaged and wrapped to avoid detection. The drugs had a street value estimated at £2.4 million, making the operation one of the more significant air-based smuggling attempts uncovered in the region that year. Authorities confirmed that Balian had used his aviation experience and access to small airstrips to bypass normal customs checks and transport drugs into the country. When questioned, Balian's digital messages offered a glimpse into his mindset. He had compared his illegal flights to scenes from a Hollywood movie about drug-running pilots, joking with an associate that their work looked like something straight out of a film. But prosecutors said his actions were far from cinematic. They were deliberate, calculated, and posed serious risks to the public. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Anastasios Balian pleaded guilty to importing Class A drugs. In September 2025, a UK court sentenced him to 9 years in prison. Just before we get into the next pilot's case, if you find these stories interesting, please support my channel by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Thank you. Case 5. Lyle Prowse was once a proud captain for Northwest Airlines, known for his long flying career and calm leadership in the cockpit. But in 1990, his name became front-page news for all the wrong reasons. What began as a routine early morning flight from Fargo, North Dakota to Phoenix, Arizona, turned into one of the most infamous cases in U.S. aviation history. Just hours before takeoff, Captain Prowse and 2 other crew members had been drinking heavily at a local bar. Witnesses later told investigators that the men consumed multiple rounds of beer and shots before returning to their hotel for only a few hours of rest. At dawn, Prowse reported for duty, unaware that his decision that night would end his flying career and nearly send him to prison for years. After the flight landed safely in Phoenix, anonymous tips reached authorities. Toxicology tests showed that Captain Prowse's blood alcohol level was 0.13%, well above the federal limit of 0.04% for pilots. The FBI stepped in, and for the first time in American aviation history, a commercial airline captain was charged with flying while intoxicated. The news shocked the country and sparked intense debate about alcohol use among airline crews. In 1990, Prowse was convicted in federal court and sentenced to 16 months in prison. His pilot's license was revoked, and his future in aviation seemed destroyed. Yet after completing his sentence, Prowse entered recovery, committed to sobriety, and later worked tirelessly to support other pilots struggling with addiction. Years later, the FAA reinstated his license, and he eventually flew again before retiring honorably. Case 6. Charles Randall Sorensen spent years flying passengers across the country as a pilot for United Airlines. By 2024, his career came crashing down when federal prosecutors uncovered a major scheme involving falsified flight records and stolen disability benefits. The man once responsible for hundreds of lives in the air was now at the center of a criminal case that exposed greed, deception, and a shocking abuse of the aviation system. Investigators discovered that while Sorensen had claimed to be medically unfit to fly, collecting disability payments from the Department of Veterans Affairs, he was secretly working full-time as a commercial airline pilot. Records showed that during the same period, he received government benefits for a supposed disability. He logged thousands of flight hours for United Airlines. Federal authorities said he concealed his true employment and income to keep receiving payments he no longer deserved. Court filings revealed that Sorensen's actions stretched over several years and cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. When the case reached trial, prosecutors emphasized that his deception not only defrauded the government but also damaged public confidence in the systems designed to support veterans with legitimate health problems. Sorensen admitted guilt and accepted full responsibility in court. In 2024, a federal judge sentenced him to 41 months in prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release, for his role in the scheme and ordered him to repay the money he had wrongfully obtained. His pilot's license was permanently revoked, ending a career that had once placed him among the country's most trusted professionals. Case 7. Charles A. Davis served nearly 3 decades as a pilot for U.S. Airways, earning a high salary and living what seemed like a disciplined professional life. But behind that image, prosecutors said, he had quietly stopped paying federal income taxes for years. What began as small acts of defiance eventually turned into one of the most serious tax fraud cases ever brought against an airline pilot in the United States. According to court documents, Davis stopped filing proper tax returns as far back as 1996, even though he was earning between $130,000 and $190,000 a year. He told his employer he was exempt from federal tax withholding, meaning no money was deducted from his paycheck. Later, between 2004 and 2008, he went even further, submitting false tax returns that claimed huge refunds totaling about $1.5 million. Investigators said he created fake financial documents, used a false Texas address, hid assets in other accounts, and even filed for bankruptcy to block IRS collection efforts. Federal prosecutors argued that Davis's conduct wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate attempt to cheat the system over many years while continuing to earn a full salary as a commercial pilot. In 2012, a jury found him guilty of 10 counts of filing false tax returns and 1 count of obstructing the Internal Revenue Service. On September 6, 2012, at a federal court in North Carolina, Davis was sentenced to 10 years in prison and ordered to pay more than $538,000 in restitution. He also faced an additional year of supervised release after serving his sentence. U.S. Airways terminated his employment and his pilot's license was revoked. Case 8. Michael Fay claimed to be a commercial airline pilot but posed with forged credentials for more than 8 months. He operated flights for Africa Airways, flying an Airbus A320 into London's Gatwick Airport and elsewhere, all while lacking a valid license and medical certification. During that span, he used falsified documents to secure his position. Investigators noted his license had been altered, and his medical information was fabricated. One airline pilot picked up on inconsistencies and raised the alarm via an online forum, triggering a deeper probe. Police arrested Fay on February 3, 2011. At the time of his arrest, he was living in Alton, Hampshire in the UK. He initially failed to appear in court for sentencing, fled the country via Qatar, Germany, and Ireland using a second passport, then surrendered voluntarily. In 2013, a UK court sentenced Fay to 3 years in prison for fraud and forging a pilot's documents. The case also forced Africa Airways to review its contracting and verification methods for pilot screening. Fay's scheme exposed serious aviation safety vulnerabilities. By operating flights under false pretenses, he placed passengers, crews, and aircraft at risk. The incident triggered policy changes in how airlines and regulators verify pilot licenses, especially in less scrutinized jurisdictions. Case 9. Normand Dubé was a well-known Canadian pilot and businessman from Quebec, often referred to in local media as the pilot from Sainte-Anne-des-Lacs. Skilled in aviation and known for flying small private aircraft, he once ran a successful air charter service. But over time, his name became linked not to professional flying, but to one of the most unusual criminal cases in Canadian aviation history, a story that mixed personal revenge, sabotage, and defiance of the law. Quebec authorities in 2014 accused Dubé of deliberately attacking Hydro-Quebec's infrastructure. Investigators said he flew his plane at low altitude and dropped homemade objects onto power transmission lines, causing serious damage that left thousands of homes without electricity. The act was described as an act of retaliation after Dubé became embroiled in a long-running dispute with government agencies and public officials. His attack on the power grid raised major safety concerns, as flying near high-voltage lines could have easily caused an aviation disaster. After a lengthy investigation, police arrested Dubé, and in 2018, he was found guilty of mischief endangering life and mischief to property exceeding $5,000. Prosecutors argued that his actions were not impulsive but planned, showing both aviation knowledge and intent to cause disruption. The court agreed, sentencing him to 7 years in prison. But the story did not end there. In 2019, before serving his full term, Dubé disappeared. Authorities later confirmed he had fled, violating his parole and becoming a fugitive. He was eventually recaptured after a months-long search. Case 10. Greg Lynn, a former Jetstar pilot, became the central figure in one of Australia's most perplexing criminal cases. Once known for his aviation expertise, Lynn's name is now synonymous with a tragic and controversial incident in Victoria's high country. Lynn encountered Carol Clay, 73, and her companion Russell Hill, 74, in March 2020 at a remote campsite in the Wanangata Valley. The trio reportedly had a dispute over hunting activities, loud music, and Hill's drone photography. Lynn claimed that the confrontation escalated into a struggle involving a shotgun and a knife, leading to the accidental deaths of both campers. However, prosecutors argued that Lynn intentionally killed Clay to prevent her from being a witness to Hill's death. After a 5-week trial, a jury found Lynn guilty of murdering Carol Clay, but acquitted him of murdering Russell Hill. The court heard that Lynn had concealed and burned the bodies of the victims, using kerosene to set them alight, in an attempt to destroy evidence. Justice Michael Croucher described the murder as brutal and horrific, emphasizing the severity of the crime. Lynn was sentenced to 32 years in prison, with a minimum of 24 years before he could be eligible for parole. Lynn's legal team filed an appeal against the conviction, citing several grounds, including claims of prosecutorial misconduct and errors in the jury's deliberations. The appeal is scheduled to be heard on October 31, 2025, at Victoria's Court of Appeal. Lynn continues to maintain his innocence and seeks to overturn the conviction and sentence. Case 11. David John Cutmore, an Australian pilot, became infamous for his involvement in one of Papua New Guinea's most significant drug trafficking cases. Once known for his aviation skills, Cutmore's name is now associated with a high-profile criminal operation that spanned multiple countries. Cutmore piloted a Cessna 402C aircraft from Mariba, Queensland, to Papua New Guinea in July 2020. Upon arrival, he attempted to load approximately 611 kilograms of cocaine, valued at over 340 million kina, 141 million Australian dollars, at a makeshift airstrip near Papalea, Central Province. The aircraft crashed during takeoff, likely due to the excessive weight of the drugs. The crash site was discovered by local authorities, leading to a significant drug bust. In October 2022, Cutmore pleaded guilty to charges related to money laundering by receiving criminal property, cocaine, under Papua New Guinea's Dangerous Drug Act. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Despite his deteriorating health and requests for a suspended sentence or extradition to Australia, the court upheld the sentence, emphasizing the severity of the offense and the need for deterrence. Cutmore appealed the sentence, but in January 2025, the Papua New Guinea Supreme Court dismissed his appeal, affirming the original 18-year term. The court noted that the trial judge had appropriately considered Cutmore's medical condition and determined that the sentence was not excessive given the circumstances. Case 12. Pascal Faure is a former French naval and military pilot who found himself at the center of a dramatic international case. He once held a highly regarded career, but his name later became tied to a large-scale drug smuggling scandal that spanned several countries. In March 2013, Faure and his co-pilot, Bruno Odos, flew a private jet that stopped in the Dominican Republic. Authorities found 26 suitcases on board, containing approximately 700 kilograms, about 1,500 pounds, of cocaine. The case was quickly labeled the air cocaine affair. Faure and Odos maintained they did not know about the illicit cargo. Their defense argued that as pilots, they were only responsible for flying the aircraft and not for inspecting passenger luggage. Meanwhile, prosecutors pointed to suspicious communications and earlier unusual flights as signs of involvement. In the Dominican Republic, the pilots were convicted in absentia of drug smuggling, and each was handed a 20-year sentence. In 2015, Faure and Odos escaped the country and returned to France under controversial circumstances. When tried in France in 2019, they were sentenced to 6 years in prison. However, on appeal in 2021, the court acquitted them, citing insufficient evidence of their knowing involvement in the trafficking operation. Case 13. Michael Carey Clemens was once a respected airline pilot from Sacramento, California. He had built a life that involved frequent travel across Asia, working in aviation, and enjoying privileges that came with the job. But behind that professional image was a man living a disturbing double life. Federal investigators later revealed that Clemens was using his international travel not for work, but to commit some of the most serious crimes imaginable against children. According to U.S. prosecutors, Clemens began his criminal activities around 2014 while stationed in Bangkok. He worked with contacts in the Philippines to identify, photograph, and exploit young girls, some as young as 7. Evidence showed that he paid local accomplices thousands of dollars to arrange photo shoots of minors so he could select victims for abuse. He directed the production of explicit images, paid for recording equipment, and instructed his associates on how to stage the photos. Investigators later found that Clemens had also planned multiple trips to the Philippines with the intent of having sexual contact with underage girls. When agents searched his digital devices, they discovered more than 27,000 images and over 170 videos of child pornography, many linked to the minors he had targeted overseas. Court filings showed that Clemens used his earnings as a pilot to fund the abuse, transferring money from the United States to his partners in the Philippines through wire services. His crimes were uncovered after a long international investigation involving the FBI, Homeland Security, and Philippine authorities. In September 2017, a federal jury found him guilty of traveling with the intent to engage in sexual conduct with minors, conspiracy to produce child pornography, and buying children for exploitation. The court described his actions as methodical and predatory, and on January 23, 2018, U.S. District Judge John A. Mendez sentenced Michael Carey Clemens to life in federal prison. Case 14. Wayne Douglas Burnett, a charter and private pilot based out of San Antonio, Texas, whose flying career took a serious turn when he became involved in a federal drug trafficking case. In March 2017, authorities tracked Burnett's aircraft after detecting a suspicious flight pattern that ended with his landing at Llano Municipal Airport, Texas. On board his single-engine airplane, law enforcement found approximately 200 to 230 pounds of hydroponic marijuana packed into duffel bags and about $6,000 in cash. Burnett pleaded guilty in June 2017 to transporting more than 200 pounds of marijuana from Oregon into Texas via his plane. The case highlighted how small aircraft operations can be used to move large quantities of contraband across state lines. In September 2024, the official sentencing was released, and in January 2025, the U.S. District Court in Austin sentenced Burnett to 37 months in federal prison for his role in the scheme. The sentence showed that the court considered his knowledge of the cargo, the quantity of drugs involved, and his role as pilot to be significant factors in the case. Although Burnett flew aircraft legally for much of his career, his involvement in this trafficking scheme transformed his legal status and professional reputation. Case 15. Rupert de las Casas once worked as a contract pilot in Miami, flying private and chartered aircraft across Latin America. His aviation experience took an unexpected turn when he became tied to one of the largest cross-border cocaine operations ever investigated by U.S. federal authorities. In 2016, de las Casas was hired to fly a U.S.-registered private jet from the Dominican Republic to Venezuela. The plan, investigators later said, was to load roughly 1.7 tons of cocaine and continue to Honduras, where the drugs would be moved toward Mexico and into the United States. A fake flight plan had been filed claiming the destination was Brazil, an attempt to hide the true route. Before the aircraft could depart Venezuela, it crash-landed near a rural airstrip. The cargo never reached its destination, and the failed operation quickly drew international attention. Authorities traced the aircraft and uncovered evidence connecting de las Casas to the smuggling network. He was arrested the following year and later indicted by a U.S. grand jury for conspiracy to possess and distribute cocaine aboard an American-registered aircraft. After several years of legal proceedings, De las Casas pleaded guilty in 2019. In May 2024, the U.S. District Court in Hartford sentenced him to 85 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Case 16. Ronier Sanchez Alonso was a professional pilot from Mexico whose flying career took a criminal turn. In 2016, he became involved in a major international cocaine trafficking operation that stretched across several countries in Latin America. Acting as a co-pilot on a private jet, Sanchez worked alongside another pilot, Rupert de las Casas, to transport nearly 2 tons of cocaine on behalf of a drug network linked to suppliers in Venezuela and the Dominican Republic. According to U.S. federal prosecutors, the plan was to fly the U.S. registered jet from the Dominican Republic to Venezuela, load about 1,700 kilograms of cocaine, and continue to Honduras before smuggling the shipment north through Mexico into the United States. But the flight never reached its destination. Midway through the operation, the jet ran out of fuel and crash-landed on a makeshift strip in Venezuela. Although Sanchez and others initially escaped capture, investigators later traced the aircraft and uncovered its connection to the trafficking ring. After years on the run, Sanchez was arrested in Paraguay on March 25, 2021, following a U.S. extradition request. He was later transferred to the United States, where he pleaded guilty in a Connecticut federal court to conspiring to distribute cocaine. During sentencing, prosecutors highlighted his role as a trained pilot who knowingly used his aviation skills for an illegal purpose. On December 20, 2023, the court sentenced Ronier Sanchez Alonso to 4 years in federal prison. Case 17. John Tobe Larson worked as a private pilot in southern Oregon, flying small aircraft across state lines for years. But his flying career took a dangerous turn when he began using his plane to move illegal drugs. Federal investigators later said Larson wasn't just a pilot, he was the head of a trafficking operation that mixed aviation with organized crime. According to federal court records, Larson used his aircraft to transport large amounts of marijuana from Oregon to other states where the drug was still illegal and brought back bundles of cash from the sales. Things escalated when he became convinced that one of his associates might expose his operation. Instead of backing off, Larson tried to have the man killed. In 2019, he met with an undercover federal agent, believing the agent was a hired hitman. He offered $20,000 for the job, handed over detailed instructions, and even paid part of the money up front. The plot quickly collapsed. Federal agents arrested Larson in August 2019, recovered his airplane, about $100,000 in cash, and processed marijuana products from his hangar. Confronted with overwhelming evidence, he pleaded guilty to drug trafficking charges. In 2022, the U.S. District Court in Oregon sentenced John Tobe Larson to time served and 5 years of supervised release. Case 18. Donald Edwin Gallagher Jr. had spent years in the skies as an American Airlines pilot, trusted with the lives of countless passengers. Colleagues saw him as professional and experienced, the kind of man who seemed to embody responsibility. But when federal agents arrived at his Florida home in 2013, the image of a respected pilot collapsed instantly. Hidden behind the walls of his St. Petersburg residence, investigators uncovered crimes that would not only end his career, but also lead to a lengthy federal prison sentence. According to court documents, the investigation began when agents from the FBI traced several child pornography files to Gallagher's computer. The material had been shared online through networks known for distributing illegal images of minors. When investigators secured a federal search warrant, they seized his computers, storage devices, and digital cameras. Forensic analysis revealed hundreds of images and videos showing the sexual exploitation of children, some of which Gallagher had personally produced and distributed. Evidence also showed that he had shared these materials with others online, extending the harm even further. Gallagher was quickly taken into custody and charged with producing, distributing, and possessing child pornography. During the trial, prosecutors presented digital evidence proving that the crimes took place over several months and that Gallagher had used his personal electronic equipment to create and share the material. His background as an airline pilot made the revelations even more disturbing, as he held a position of immense public trust. In October 2014, a federal jury in the Middle District of Florida found him guilty on all counts. The court sentenced him to 21 years in federal prison, ordered him to forfeit all electronic devices used in the crimes, and required him to pay restitution to the victims. American Airlines terminated his employment immediately, and the Federal Aviation Administration revoked his pilot certification. Case 19. Bruno Odos was a former French military aviation pilot turned charter pilot. He earned a good reputation in aviation, but his name later became linked to a major international drug smuggling scandal, one often called the air cocaine affair. In March 2013, Odos and fellow pilot Pascal Faure were flying a private jet from the Dominican Republic to France when authorities discovered 26 suitcases holding more than 600 kilograms of cocaine aboard their aircraft. The discovery triggered one of the highest-profile air trafficking investigations in recent years. Investigators in the Dominican Republic accused Odos of involvement in the trafficking operation. In August 2015, he was convicted in absentia and sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. In April 2019, a French court in Aix-en-Provence found him guilty in the French legal proceedings and sentenced him to 6 years in prison. However, in July 2021, the appeals court acquitted Odos, concluding that the evidence was insufficient to prove he knowingly participated in the drug smuggling scheme. Odos has consistently maintained that he did not know about the illicit cargo, saying his role was simply to fly the plane and not to inspect the suitcases. Today, Bruno Odos's career in aviation remains overshadowed by the air cocaine affair, although legally acquitted in France. Case 20. Forrest Kirst worked as a small plane pilot and mechanic in Fairbanks, Alaska, often flying tourists through the Arctic mountain ranges. But one flight in August 2014 changed everything. During a sightseeing trip near Adigan Pass, his aircraft crashed, leaving 3 Canadian passengers injured, one fatally. What began as an aviation accident soon turned into a federal criminal case when investigators realized that Kirst hadn't told the truth about what happened in the air that day. According to federal court records, Kirst gave investigators from the FAA and the National Transportation Safety Board several false statements. He claimed that the aircraft had been flying at a safe altitude before suddenly dropping 1,500 feet and that a propeller malfunction caused the crash. But GPS data and mechanical analysis proved his story wrong. Investigators found no propeller failure and discovered that Kirst had flown at a dangerously low altitude through mountainous terrain, ignoring flight safety rules. When confronted with the evidence, he continued to insist on his false version of events, which prosecutors said obstructed the entire investigation. A federal grand jury charged him with obstruction and making false statements to government agencies. In September 2020, the U.S. District Court in Fairbanks sentenced Forrest Kirst to 1 year and 1 day in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a $5,000 fine. The FAA later suspended his certificates and barred his aviation company from federal contracting for 3 years. If you found these stories interesting, please support my channel by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Thank you very much.